the only true God, period. God's ways are the only good ways, period. My God spoke in a dialect of should, must, will, and is. There was no room for can, what if, or maybe. It was all certainty and no curiosity. All my life, I had questions, and every time I came up with a question I couldn't answer, a contradiction I couldn't solve, or a mystery, I put it on a shelf. But lately, that shelf had been getting heavy with questions I didn't dare say aloud. And I decided that if I was going to commit my life to a belief, then I should know dead certain why it was true.
Brothers and sisters. Okay, wrong. Now that with that lovely mood-setting music, I enjoyed it. And I'm Sohan D'Souza. I'm president of the Secular Society of MIT, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our 7th Out and Out event with Max Tang. So this is going to be about evangelicalism. Just for those who haven't been here before or are acquainted with us, we are the home of secular community at MIT, affiliated with the Secular Student Alliance and the Center for Inquiry. And our past Out and Outs have covered a wide range of religions, from Islam to Hinduism to Mormonism, most recently, Christianity, Judaism. Actually, incidentally, how many of you were at the Mormon event? Okay, a few, okay. Just today, it was actually announced that same-sex couples would be recognized by the church, and their children would be baptized. So that's a small step, and I'm not saying that we had anything to do with it. I mean, this event was 1 month ago, and there was discussion of the topic. But anyway, I like to think that we did. But yeah, so the reasoning behind this is that coming out of every religion is a slightly different experience and also slightly similar experience, depending on the religion and the personal circumstances. And we want to find a way for everyone to share our experiences coming out of different religions and the similarities and the differences and form a community around that. Just a quick housekeeping things. The bathrooms are all the way down the hall, just to the left. Yeah. So I'm very pleased to welcome Max Tang. Max Tang is a wonderstruck human speaker and writer who teaches about the power of purposeful curiosity to transform our conversations and lives. She was once a closeted Jesus freak from an upbringing so fanatical that she once tried to find a God-honoring way to eat a sandwich for Jesus. Whichever way you're imagining, she promised you it wasn't it. Now, an out and proud queer humanist, Max founded Max Gets Curious, a website, Instagram, and Facebook platform to build community among those seeking to have a joyful life beyond their former faith or homophobic family. Most recently, she was interviewed on Ryan Bell's Life After God podcast. I'm sure she'll have many more podcast media appearances to come. We're honored to have Max with us today as she shares with us the story of how curiosity led her out of fundamentalism and how we can use it to depolarize our disagreements today. Please welcome Max Tang.
Hey guys. So I thought we could start out, before I start talking, with having everyone close their eyes. Just for 10 seconds. No one fall asleep. And I just want you to think of what comes to mind when I say the words Evangelical Christian. Just take 10 seconds. Does anyone want to share reactions, images? You can open your eyes. Names. Anything that comes to mind.
Music.
Okay.
Repentance, people.
Protests. Any names or images?
Would be like consent.
Okay.
Still evangelism.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm always curious to hear what people's reactions are because for the first 16 years of my life, when I heard evangelical, the very first word that came to mind was family. I thought I was going to have a clicker. Sorry, I don't know if this is on the PowerPoint?
Sorry, yeah. Just expand this.
Cool. Alright. The very first word that came to mind was family. When I close my eyes, I don't see anything. Instead, I smell the crisp smoke of candles drifting off at youth group while my childhood friends sing to all the April birthdays like me, no matter how embarrassed we are. I taste the hot dog that my Uncle Michael hands me, fresh off the grill, as my best friend and I towel cool water out from our hair. I hear the Christian radio blaring from the speakers as we race to transform our church building into a vine-draped wonderland for summer Bible camp, with nothing but sheer creativity, an ungodly amount of paint, and way too little time. I feel the bass chords thrum in my chest as our shared, swelling melodies flood the dim worship hall with a wordless love, reminding me with every chord that I am part of something so much greater than myself. I grew up in a tight-knit Chinese American Baptist church in suburban New Jersey. Our parents, who founded our church, were converted Chinese immigrants, and much to our later delight, they all had kids around the same time. Our small community, just over 100 strong, was a family. Between Tuesday night prayer meeting, Friday night kids group, Sunday service that gave way into spontaneous all-night hangouts, cookouts, fasting weekends, holidays, and summer Bible school, my life was infused with belonging through faith. This is where I belonged and who I was. Before anything else, before I was a twin or a daughter or a Chinese American or a first grader, I was a born-again Christian. And that meant that anyone else who was born again was automatically family. I didn't just call my friend's parents auntie or uncle because of Chinese tradition. I did it because my friends were my brothers and sisters in Christ. Every summer at camp, we would hear testimonies from young adult converts who told us how lucky we were to have been brought up in the truth. And I felt lucky. I got to have a personal relationship with the God of the universe, the creator of C minor, cinnamon, and the scent of cedar. Every summer, my church would take a summer trip to Word of Life Family Campground in Spoon Lake, New York. And I have never felt the community, my closeness to God, or my certainty stronger than on one of the last nights of those trips. The outdoor sermon had just started, and my friends and our parents huddled under blankets with me on wooden benches against the cold night air. The worship team crooned behind the preacher as he called us down to the bottom of the hill to rededicate our lives to the Lord. I remember those moments perfectly. The bonfire bristling with thick snaps of sparks, soft crackles, insistent heat. The stars glimmering quietly in their shadowy seats up above the glassy black lake among silhouettes of towering trees. There I was, surrounded by believers, the night air infused with Swedish smoke and cricket song. In those days, everything felt alive and thrumming, sacred and old, so it was easy to look at the dark summer sky and see God, to feel him moving among us and to love him, more than anything to love him. It was easier still to pick my way down the incline and take a stick from one of the servers. I stared deep into the flickering fire as I prayed for God to forgive me for not giving him my all, and to help me do that now. It was easiest of all to throw that stick into the flames, a symbol of my decision to follow God for the rest of my forever. He was my God, and I was his. As the fire tossed light into the darkness, the people around me began to sing, and I closed my eyes and sang with them. After spending most summers here, I knew the words by heart. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, still I will follow. No turning back, no turning back. I remembered what I'd been told, that when we praised God, all of creation sang with us. From the crickets and their thrones of soil, to the birds chirping morning praise, to the stars humming frequencies far beyond anything my human ear could hear. What else was worth singing for? My childhood was peppered with nights like that one. The certainty of my forever family was like a warm, cozy blanket, because the rest of the world was a cold, rainy day. This was because we didn't just believe that the Bible was the Word of God. We knew that it was completely and literally, capital T, true. It was the only and the final authority on life, and it shaped our whole lives. Ever since I was little, I knew there was a line in the sand drawn between we believers and the rest of the world. We were the chosen ones, the blessed, and anyone who didn't believe like we did, we summed up in 2 words: the lost. I still went to school, played with, and loved people outside my faith, but at best they were misguided, blind, or confused. They didn't have the truth like we did, and it was our God-given purpose to show them. At worst, people outside our faith were dangerous, defying God's will, or out to get us. After all, without Christian morals, what would stop people from doing such ghastly things as committing murder or saying happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas? As a love-filled, chosen child of God, my very first run-in with true evil was in 2nd grade, with one of the world's most nefarious topics: Santa Claus. Picture this: a cute little kid, if I do say so myself, with brown bangs and a t-shirt plastered with a Bible verse. The bell had just rang and we were all heading out to our school buses when my classmate Priyanka announced loudly, "I have proof that Santa Claus exists." Now this brought a flurry of attention to Priyanka, and it drew my attention too, but for a very different reason. My parents had told me that Santa was made up. We celebrated Christmas for Jesus, not some pagan hooligan with a mustache and a penchant for breaking and entering. As I walked over, I heard Priyanka say, "I saw him last night. I even have a video." I was scandalized. My parents had told me this wasn't true, so it couldn't be. I had to tell Priyanka the truth. So, in my infinite 2nd grade wisdom, I blurted out, "But Santa isn't real." Now, I was interrupting Priyanka's moment of glory, and she was not happy. "Yes, he is," she shot back. I said, "Well, my parents said he isn't." But this only made Priyanka dig in her heels. My parents said he is, and I have proof. We went back and forth until we had to be ushered onto our buses. Priyanka was steaming, and she didn't talk to me much after that. This was a hallmark story of how I behaved as an evangelical kid. To me, the truth mattered so much more than accidentally insulting people's feelings along the way. But Santa Claus was far from my only point of difference with other kids my age. My family decided that we needed to live in the world, but not of it. So, the only music we listened to was Christian. And our 2 options for the radio were 2 stations, one which played sermons half the time. While my classmates and friends were learning about evolution in class, I filled out workbooks about why evolution was scientifically inaccurate and visited the Creation Museum in Kentucky, where we gazed in awe at animatronics of Adam and Eve. In Sunday school, we juggled words like postmillennial dispensationalism, which is just fancy Jesus speak for the end of the world. On Friday nights, my mom packed my brother and I into the car for a weekly Awana, or Approved Workmen Are Not Ashamed. We pledged allegiance to the Bible before the flag of America, and then we marched in place as we sang Hail Awana on the March for Youth in matching red vests. After snacks and games, I competed with my friends to see who could memorize Bible verses and our scripture booklets the fastest, and winning 2 medals at a regional contest for memorizing the fastest was my pride and joy. But by middle school, those medals were long forgotten because by the time I hit puberty, my church had an evangelism craze. Can I get a show of hands? Who has come across a street preacher at least once in your life? Most of us know what it feels to walk past a street preacher, but do you know what it feels like to be a street preacher? I can tell you confidently that the answer is very sweaty. In my middle school years, some of my church family and I would pile into vans and hit the malls and beaches to seek and save the lost. Clutching my little stack of gospel pamphlets with the blood rushing in my ears, I would stammer out, "Have you gotten one of these?" Luckily, I didn't have that many takers, but I would recite in my head how to respond to the types of people that my street preaching book told me about. It was complete with punny names and cartoons. Like the atheist who is an awkward college student who would only talk to you about evolution. You knew that the next one was a liberal because they were vegan. And then there was the gay case study who knew they were living in sin but still did it anyway. Luckily, as I got older, I met more and more people who could find their way around my walls. One of these people was a friend I'll call Kyle. I had known Kyle since middle school, and he was one of the most kind and genuine people I had met. So in high school, when he decided to share with our school that he was trans, I was shocked. Up until then, I had only had 2 encounters with trans people. The first was in one of those street preaching booklets, which said that trans people were defying God's design, and therefore it was loving to show them the truth. The second was in a parking garage where my mom pointed out a trans woman and her kids and whispered, "He should have his kids taken away from him." My beliefs about trans people were like bricks in a wall that separated me from truly understanding and seeing trans people for who they were. And that wall shot right up when I found out that Kyle was trans. Now, being evangelical means that you become queen of the side-eye, and so at my lunch table, I would whisper indignantly about our trans classmate. He knew he was defying God's will, and he did it anyway. Other people pushed back against me, but in my mind, I was just speaking the truth. When it came to saving souls, converting other people to my understanding of the truth was way more important than accidentally offending people. But Kyle couldn't be contained to the other side of my wall, and luckily he had a way bigger mouth than I did. He was not afraid to push back against my beliefs about women, gender roles, sex, and sexuality. He challenged me to explain the reasoning behind some of my beliefs, and he offered other ways of seeing things. It made an awful lot of sense. My conversations with him and seeing him day to day in action as the same kind and goofy person he'd always been began to wear away at my beliefs. I began to see Kyle for who he truly was. And I began to wonder if this belief was wrong, then what else might be? Around the same time, a friend I'll call Emma made a comment in chem class that changed everything. We were talking about world religions, which I was really curious about because all I'd really learned about them was why they were false idolatry. Emma showed me her Star of David necklace, but then she said that if her faith had a symbol, it wouldn't be a Star of David, it would be a question mark. Because to her, faith was about asking questions. That's when it hit me. If my faith had a symbol, it would be a big, fat period. Our God is the only true God, period. God's ways are the only good ways, period. My God spoke in a dialect of should, must, will, and is. There was no room for can, what if, or maybe. It was all certainty and no curiosity. All my life, I had had questions, and every time I came up with a question I couldn't answer, a contradiction I couldn't solve, or a mystery, I put it on a shelf. But lately, that shelf had been getting heavy with questions I didn't dare say aloud. And I decided that if I was going to commit my life to a belief, then I should know dead certain why it was true. So, slowly but surely, I began to dare to get curious. The fear of hell, the fear that I had been born into the right religion and now I was leaving it behind, the fear of going into a world that I knew nothing about, kept me in a cycle of questioning, repenting as 5 times a day, but my shelf had broken, and Google Incognito and YouTube became my teachers about ethics, world religion, politics, sexuality, and so much more. The more I pulled at the thread of my faith, the more and more came undone, and by the time I was a senior in high school, my faith was beyond salvaging. This was never something I wanted. I was the girl who threw sticks into bonfires and saw God in the night sky. No turning back, no turning back. And there was no turning back now, just for a completely different reason. Because in the wake of my questioning, I had realized that I was bisexual. And I immediately knew that my parents would do anything to save my soul if they found out, to protect me from myself. So to protect myself from them, I hid my disbelief in my sexuality. I had no idea how to live without God. I had never felt so alone and lost, so I hunted down every story I possibly could about other people who had left their faiths. Curiosity became my survival. Their stories saved me, so I decided to tell mine. So I started a blog called Mexico's Godless, where I shared about my personal journey of recovery away from the toxic beliefs of my faith. Around the same time, I became the co-moderator of a support blog called The Art of Leaving. It was founded by someone who's sitting here today. It's a support blog that amplifies the voices of people who are recovering from toxic faiths. If there is a God, then she has a sense of humor, because my parents, who festooned every room in the house with a cross and listened to sermons on the radio, ended up letting me go to the most liberal and Jewish college I've ever stepped foot on, Brandeis University. I realized that if questioning had been my way out, then maybe it could be my way forward. Curiosity had brought my walls tumbling down, and now I would use it to rebuild new beliefs on the rubble. I joined clubs, sought out conversations, and made friends from backgrounds that would have once made me squirm. Learning about how other people live opened my eyes to the gorgeous truth that there is no one right way to live. It taught me for the first time that I have the power to choose how I live. But as empowering as my liberal friends could be, I learned that sometimes they had beliefs that kept them from seeing people they disagreed with too. After one club meeting one night, a friend ranted to me, "Pro-lifers don't really care about saving babies. They just want to take away women's rights." They looked at me, the ex-evangelical, expecting me to agree in righteous indignation, but instead, all I did was cringe. All I could think was, "You've never really met a pro-lifer, have you?" I flashed back to this documentary I had watched in middle school. I could still vividly remember sitting on the couch, sickened, as I heard the number of abortions that had been performed in the US. Because if life began at conception, then abortion was a genocide, and I should have friends sitting next to me who weren't alive. I thought of the people I grew up with. They weren't pro-life because they had some dastardly scheme against women. They believed that fetuses were people and they loved people. It occurred to me that my friend had walls up too. And after I talked with my friend about her comment, I decided that I never wanted to sit behind a wall again. If our beliefs form walls that separate us from the people we disagree with, then maybe practicing curiosity can become a bridge. But as much as I loved the life that I was leading in college, I was still keeping up a double life at home. For years now, I've known that if my parents ever found out that I was queer and a non-believer, they wouldn't be able to support or understand me. After all, their first job was to protect me, even from myself. And so I knew that they would do anything to save my soul. The weight of my double life crushed me. Sometimes I was so depressed I couldn't even leave my room. But as I met more and more people from Mexico's Godless, The Art of Leaving, and in real life, I began to wonder if there could be joy, meaning, and safety in life beyond an unsupportive family. I knew that telling my parents would destroy everything we knew, but I dared to imagine that we could survive it, that I could thrive, and that I deserved to try. So on March 19th, 2 years ago, on the phone, I blurted out to my parents, "I don't believe in Christianity anymore, and I'm bisexual." For the shortest eternity, there was silence, and then my mom came on the phone. She said, "What did we do to deserve this?" We went back and forth for a while, and then my dad came on the phone. And he said the words that I've been expecting to hear since I lost my faith. "I won't be paying for Brandeis anymore." I woke up the next morning to a text informing me that he would come pick me up and take me back home, and I could go to community college if I picked an appropriate major. But I couldn't go back home, and things escalated until finally the only safe place that I felt we could meet was the campus police station. They arrived at 6 a.m., and we sat across from the table, father, mother, daughter, with the clock ticking loudly up on the wall. And I tried to explain how it could be that I could have been brought up in their truth and left it anyway. I tried to explain that venturing outside our faith had brought me joy and meaning beyond anything I'd known before, that I was still me, that I was still a good person. But my mom just kept saying, "You know the truth. We brought you up in the truth. You know the truth." I tried to explain that being bisexual was about love, but my dad kept bringing it back to genitals. I had never felt so alone or so split open. When explaining who I was didn't work, I tried to explain why I didn't believe what they believed. I gave them all the reasons I could for why I felt God didn't exist, but just like my fight with Priyanka in second grade, all they did was dig in their heels. The clock inched forward a couple of hours. I was frustrated. I tried to be clear, patient, calm. They fumed, cried, reasoned, but it felt like everything that they said didn't make sense to me, and everything that I said just went past their heads. It felt like talking to a wall. I couldn't help but think back to my conversation with Emma in chem class. My parents' beliefs were a period. And then it occurred to me that all that morning, everything that my parents and I had said to each other had ended with a period. We had been so bent on being heard that we had never dared to ask a question. So instead of going after my dad's beliefs, I decided to ask what they meant to him. I asked him, "What does Christianity mean to you?" And my dad, who had been a stranger and a threat for the past couple of weeks, was suddenly my dad again. His face softened, and he sat back as he thought for a while. And then he said, "There has to be someone rewarding the good and punishing the bad in the universe. Otherwise, what's the point?" And I saw my dad who was a Chinese immigrant, who had come to America when he was 7, who had been told his whole life, if you work hard, you'll be rewarded, who had seen so much injustice go unpunished. And I thought, of course he would want a worldview, the divine policeman, and what a human thing to want. I remembered when I lost my faith, that coming to terms with the fact that bad things happen to good people was one of the hardest things I had to face. Asking a question had interrupted the mood in the room, and so my dad asked a question that interrupted my thoughts. He said, "Now let me ask you a question. Are you still my daughter?" And I said, "Yes." "Are you still my dad?" And he said, "I don't agree with what you're doing, but I still love you." And my mom nodded in agreement. Curiosity will not solve world hunger. It hasn't changed my parents' beliefs about sexuality, but curiosity has changed everything for me. It's broken down everything I thought I knew and introduced me to the breathtaking adventure of being wrong. It's taken me from a Bible-thumping, street-preaching Santa hater to an out and proud, wonder-filled humanist. So if there's anything you take from my stories today, I hope that it's the next time you disagree with someone, you find the courage to ask a question. And above all, I hope you ask yourself the question, what are the bricks in your wall? Aren't you curious? Thank you. Ooh, that was an emotional roller coaster.
Wonderful. Shall we take some questions,
Yeah.
perhaps? Okay. Just raise your hands if you have a question.
So you still say you lost your faith,
Yeah.
then what is your faith now? Are you still curious?
I identify as a secular humanist. You could call me an atheist because I don't believe that a God exists, but personally I feel like atheist is all about what you don't believe in, and for me humanism is what I do believe in. Atheism is I don't believe that there's a God. Humanism is I believe in the power and the sacredness and the potential of humans, and so I identify as a humanist.
You define humanist is not believing in God.
Do you mean like do I believe in God?
No, so first you define yourself as humanist,
Yeah.
and then you might quite say you don't believe in God.
Yeah.
And so come back to my question is so you said you are losing your faith, so
Yeah.
you lost your faith,
Yeah.
and are you still search for faith,
No, I don't think
or you prefer without the faith, or here the faith apparently is evangelical Christian faith is your definition?
I'm definitely not Christian anymore.
No. It's, I mean, we're discussing with this kind of definitions, and then equates of humanist. So here seems you separate the humanist versus evangelicalism. Do you think that true? Humanist is not evangelical.
I guess
I'm
you'd
not
be
clear about this. Interfaith level, I mean, or definition levels.
I guess you could be evangelical and humanist.
Could it be both?
Yeah. I think a humanist is just. I mean, usually humanists are people who are also atheists, but I don't think you have to be an atheist to be a humanist. I think humanism is really about believing in like progress and common ground of humanity. So it could be a really interfaith, like intersection for sure. Chris.
You speak on how your project came from Maxwell's Godless to Max Gets Curious.
Yeah. So I was in New Zealand. I went to study abroad after I came out, and somehow, and I met this woman. I watched her TED Talk. Her name is Lilia Tarwa, and she gave a TED Talk about leaving her cult in Gloriavale. It's in New Zealand. And I'd never heard someone talk about being post-faith or coming from a faith background and making it into an inspiring message or a positive message before. All of my interactions with post-faith people had been very much, we are hurt and we need to talk about our hurt, and our hurt needs to be taken seriously. And there is not a lot about moving forward or just having that kind of message is, like I am a person beyond this. And so I started to think about how my experiences could be relatable or relevant to other people or what's going on today. And so I decided that I wanted to move from Max Goes Godless to Max Gets Curious because I didn't want to define myself by the faith I was leaving. I wanted to define myself by what I'm becoming. And so I switched my blog from my own personal journey about recovery from religion to now I talk about mental health recovery and the importance of dialogue, and I'm also especially committed to creating community for people who want to create life beyond a form of faith or family, and so that's what I do now.
Any other questions?
How to word. So do you think that it was your serious about your faith that sort of led you away from it? You talked about being committed to truth, and I feel like that. I know so many people who stayed Christian but weren't ever quite as serious about it. I wonder about that.
Did you say serious?
Seriousness about it. Or,
Yeah. I think probably because when you're so like 0 to 100 about a belief, like you gotta like commit, like you know, like you can't. I think because it was so like, you know, the Bible is 100% accurate. Everything must be literally true. If one thing is true, then the whole thing just goes. And yeah, so I think that definitely contributed.
Are there particular questions, certain big questions that mainly influence you, or is this long range and a bunch of little questions?
I think it was a lot of little things. There's a really popular metaphor among post-Mormons that's called the shelf, which is what I talked about, where if you have something like a question you can't answer, you put it on the shelf and you just, let it be or leave it there, or you come back to it later. So for me, it was a lot of things that I put on the shelf. It was, why can't women teach men? And, why does Kyle have to go to hell? Like, why, everyone thinks that their religion is the correct religion. So why is what makes our religion the correct one out of all of those people saying that their religion is right? And just from there, just a lot of inconsistencies in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, that really got me. And I think consistency was the most important thing for me. And trying to understand, we have this definition of love, but our intention is to love people, but the effects are so far from that. And I couldn't align myself with a faith that did that. Chris.
How does one eat a sandwich to honor?
So that's from a Francis Chan book, and it's called Crazy Love. So if you've never heard of Francis Chan or Crazy Love, he became really popular in evangelical circles. He came out with this book about kind of dedicating your entire life to glorifying God. And in the book, my church went through it chapter by chapter. And in the book, he talks about this idea that if God tells you to eat a sandwich, to glorify Him, then you gotta find a way. And this kind of showcases how committed you're supposed to be to all of it. And I don't really know. I was like, do you just pray beforehand and it doesn't matter how you eat it? I don't know, can you not make eye contact with anyone when you eat the sandwich? I've never really solved that mystery as I put it on my shelf. Yeah.
So you talk about using questions to bring down the walls. Do you have any examples of good questions to sort of open up dialogue with people with different faiths?
Yeah. It's hard, right? Because when people have such deeply held beliefs, you can't just be like, why do you think God is real? I think you have to start with the values behind them and what it means to people. And I think that that's a good starting ground. When I was talking to Priyanka and I said, Santa Claus isn't real, right from the get-go, that's not gonna get anywhere because Santa Claus meant so much to her. And also she had a video, she had evidence that too. So I guess I found that asking people what they love about their faith and asking people what their faith means to them, can help connect you to the values and the person behind the beliefs, even if you can't connect directly to the beliefs. Yeah.
So regarding like political polarization and people kind of talking past each other, is that, would you say something that's relevant to the difference between like a period mentality versus a Western mentality? Is that what we're lacking?
Like I said, curiosity definitely won't solve world hunger, but I think it can be a good starting point. I think when it comes to any disagreement, whether it's religious or political, especially those two things, because they're so like polarized and the beliefs are so deeply held most of the time, I think it can be so easy to just sit there and be like, this is what I believe, this is why I believe it, and this is the evidence, and that's that. And stopping and taking the time to ask the person how they reached their conclusion, or asking if they've ever considered alternatives or different ways of seeing things beyond that. I think opening something up to a discussion rather than, these are my beliefs, these are your beliefs, let's like duke it out with logic. I think that sometimes it can shift the mood in a room, and so it can be helpful. I think it's definitely not a cure-all, but I think it can be a helpful tool. Chris.
What happened after that conversation with your parents?
We talked a lot more, and then they left, and that was the last time I saw them in person for a while, because beyond the religion, there are just a lot of personal dynamics, like relationship things going on, and especially with boundaries. I think that's something that I found a lot, like growing up in an evangelical culture, at least for me, boundaries were not something that people really had. And so I didn't talk to my parents for a while, a long time after that. I've been low contact with them, actually, and still am. Although my dad called me maybe 2 months ago, and he apologized for everything that had happened, and he said that he can't take things back, but we can only move forward, and he wants a relationship with me. And I think that him seeing me live my life the way I wanted to I think it changed something in him, because he's a Chinese immigrant, and so he always had to do what his parents told him to do. Like, he didn't really have an option. He went along with the job that they gave him, that they told him to pursue, and all of that stuff. And then he told me he's been watching like motivational videos on YouTube, and and like TED Talks, and he loves TED Talks, and and that he wants to see how other people live. He wants to retire in Hawaii and Vegas and places like that. And I know Vegas, but yeah, I mean, it's a long game, I think, with parents who are homophobic, because as much as I can try to connect with the human in my dad, that the end of it all is that I need people in my life who can love me the way I need to be loved, and so I needed to really take a step back. So that's where we've been. Yeah.
Another people question is, you're separating this worldview towards like God and religion more of the period, as in you're completely sure, is it still more of a question mark? I guess
There could be a
second
God.
point-
I guess I'm agnostic. I don't know. Like, the thing about me is that I love not knowing things, which is maybe why I love curiosity. So I don't know, like, there could be a God, but when it comes to the God of the Bible, I don't believe that one exists. And if one does exist, then I wouldn't want to worship that God. And Yeah, so I guess it's more like ellipsis, like dot dot dot. Yeah.
So last out and out, we also had someone who, I mean, you might have seen it, I'm not sure. Talk about, the speaker talked about how he also struggled with questions of sexuality and how religion kind of repressed these, and this does seem to be a pattern. So
Yeah.
just wondering, like, nowadays, there are these movements to kind of make churches more LGBTQ friendly. What kind of a future does this have as like a general shift in that direction? Because it seems right now they're kind of like splitting along those lines, and so you have churches that are very LGBTQ friendly, and others that are, kind of still holding on like extra strong to their views about sexuality.
Well, have you guys heard of the Methodist split? It's pretty recent. Basically, the United Methodist Church had a vote recently on whether or not to fully accept LGBTQ clergy, I think, and they decided not to. And I mean, the swing vote was a lot of delegates actually from Africa. So that was a really big thing that happened recently. The LDS Church decision I didn't hear about, but that's enormous because I have a friend whose entire life has been shaped by the decision they had made before this one, which was basically not to accept, to fully accept queer people, and this decision now coming out is, anyway, I think it's really good that churches or religious centers are starting to be more affirming now. I feel like the general consensus is that times are changing and you need to reform your faith or your views if you want to keep up. And then of course there are churches like mine that are like, this is the sign of the times, like the end times are coming, like the more you accept queer people, the more we will be staunchly in our views and all of that stuff, and just really dig in their heels. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Dallas Statement or what was the other one? Denver. It might have been the Denver Statement. It was like some other city. Oh, Nashville, because people called it the Trashville Statement. Okay. Yeah, it was a Nashville Statement. The Nashville Statement and the Dallas Statement, and one of them was specifically about gender and sexuality, and it was basically a bunch of evangelical leaders all got together, and they were like, "Hey, world, just in case you don't know, we are homophobic." And I really wish I was paraphrasing, but that's really what it was. And the other one was about social justice specifically, and it was basically like evangelicals have no historical role in racism. Like that's literally like a line. I'm paraphrasing the line, but like that's what it says. And then also more stuff about complementarianism, which is the idea that women and men are made, they're like separate but equal. I think definitely a lot more religious centers feel like they have to make a stand in one direction. And I think that's really good news for a lot of queer people and for the churches that remain in their beliefs, like my church. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know my church has a very martyrish complex, and I think that's very common in evangelical churches. And so the more that mainstream culture changes and becomes more affirming, the more they will feel like they are martyrs or outsiders, or it'll just kind of be confirmation bias. So, yeah.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
So, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but about your father being an immigrant, right? And we kind of tend to see this a lot in communities of immigrants from, say, Asia or Africa, primarily from Asia.
Yeah.
We had a speaker, for example, who was a Korean American, talked about like how the Korean Christian church was the place where they would all bring the kids together and find each other. And this is kind of also similar to my experience growing up as a Catholic and as an expatriate Catholic outside my home country, the country of birth. So just wondering, like, I don't know how much you quite relate to this, because like only your father was an immigrant, but how much did this play in this maybe the reluctance to let go of something that had been kind of tied in with finding an anchor and things like that?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I forgot, like, for your last question, I don't know if you guys have heard of Church Clarity, but it's a really cool website. It's a brilliant idea, I think. Basically, the whole premise is to create a list of churches, I think either in the US or worldwide, and anyone can submit the name of a church, and what they do is they basically try to figure out if the church is truly affirming or not, both of women and of queer people. And so when they do their research, they'll put out on social media and on their website, this church is or is not affirming. So I think that's really a sign, right, that people care about whether churches are affirming or not, and that also a lot of them are being asked, to take a stance. Because there are a lot of stories of people going to churches thinking that they're affirming, finding a community, finding a place there, making friends, and then finding out that they're not truly affirming, and it's heartbreaking. And then your other question, this is something I've thought about a lot. My parents are, my dad is a Chinese immigrant, my mom was born here, but her parents are immigrants. They're both Chinese. And I really think that what happened was, or what happens for a lot of Chinese immigrants, at least in my church, is they come to the US, right? They don't know the language, they don't know a lot of people here. And then you find this really warm, welcoming group of people who cook the same food that is familiar to you, that's home. And then they have songs in the language you speak. They read the Bible in your language, they can talk to you. There's childcare, like they have summer Bible camp, that was really big for us. You can drop your kid off and come pick them up later, and it's just really helpful. I think it's really, it can be a really helpful resource for immigrants, but also I think that the theology really meshed with how my parents saw relationships, right? Because we believe that the human relationship with God was like the template for like how all relationships should be, and it's a very paternalistic one. It's a very authoritarian one, and that's what my dad and my mom were used to with their parents. What your parents say goes. They know better than you. They're just trying to protect you. You'll understand when you're older. Just kind of parallel to you'll understand when you get to heaven. And so I think it just made a lot of sense for them, like culturally, like taking on this religion. And so, yeah, I think it's hard for them to let go of that when it's been such a source of certainty and community for them. To question your faith, like when you're, 50 is like a double midlife crisis. So it's hard.
Like going forward, what do you think? I don't know, maybe the atheist community or non-believers in general can do about kind of addressing this, the pull that these community ethnic churches and ethnic groups. In fact, we have like an Asian Baptist student club here, so it kind of comes along those lines as well. So we have a kind of a paucity, I think, of sort of like movement non-belief, having Asians in,
I don't know. I think, if if you're talking about people from China, let's say, because I don't know the situation in other countries as well.
The Asian Americans.
Yeah, like if you're a Chinese immigrant, you're probably coming from a background that is not that religious, or if it is religious, it might be Buddhist, or you know, like what is it, Chinese folk religion, like my grandparents, and so I don't know. I don't know if they would be drawn to like an atheist organization the same way that someone might be drawn to a religious organization, especially because in a lot of countries in the world, also in the US, like religion is a way of organizing community. So I think religion definitely has like a +1 in that category. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see if like the atheist community could do something for immigrants, because I also think being an atheist who is the child of immigrants or an atheist who is an immigrant can be really uniquely difficult.
We have a question in the back of it.
So you talked about the churches affirming queer, whether they accept queer people or not. So do you think if churches moved in that direction, if they started accepting queer people, do you think that would be enough for people, for other people who are moving from church to sort of accept the church again? Is that the main hurdle?
They would have to change a lot. I guess I don't know. I would love if churches became more affirming. Like I think it's a matter of life and death. But for me, I guess if you mean like for me to become a Christian, is that what you're asking, or to
Well,
just?
for you specifically, and in general for people who are in a similar situation.
I think for me, the problem starts with original sin, which is like that's like really in there with the theology, like that's a core belief. If they changed it to original blessing, which I think is like a pretty rad idea. I think you know they have a shot at winning me back. But if you guys don't know, original sin is the belief that like basically you know, Adam and Eve sinned, and so the nature of all humans is to sin and to commit wrongdoing, and that's just in you, that's who you are. And then it also brings to mind like total depravity, which is what is the belief that I was raised with, which is you can do nothing good without God. All of your best deeds are like dirty rags, which the cultural translation would be use tampons, like that's what we were taught. So original blessing is the idea that, you know, in Genesis, God says, and he created everything, and he was like, and God saw it, and he said it was good, and that's the original blessing. And so it's kind of building the faith on this basis that people are good instead of people do wrong and people are flawed. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to learn more about it, but yeah, for me, like that's one of the issues that I have with mainstream Christianity or Protestant Christianity. But I mean, affirming is like a great step in that direction.
And if you come to factual, if you'd not been queer, do you think you might have stayed in the church, or?
I don't know. I think it's different for everyone, because I know of quite a few people who are still Christian and they're also queer. Like there are bloggers, like Miguel Garcia comes to mind. I don't know how much you guys know about like post-Christian bloggers or queer Christian bloggers, but yeah, like they're definitely out there. So I feel like it depends on your personality and what you're looking for in spirituality, because there are a lot of people who are still queer and they're still Christian. Like those are two parts of who they are, and they will not give them up, because that's what's right for them. That's what's affirming for them. Yeah, so I mean, if I wasn't queer, I don't know. I think I started to doubt long before I realized I was bi, and for me, a lot of the pain of leaving my faith wasn't about being queer. It was about realizing that the beliefs that I was raised with, that I was told, this is the only good and true way of seeing the world, were actually hurting me in a lot of different ways. Like, they contributed to my mental illness. Like, I grew up with situational mutism and depression and disordered eating and a lot of other stuff. And when I went to my primary care physician, who was a Christian, she gave me vitamins, I think, and then she gave me a list of Bible verses to memorize. And I remember going to a Christian counselor, and she said maybe my depression was demons trying to subvert my fate on earth. So it was just a lot of stuff that I felt was hurtful to the humanity in me, and it wasn't just about sexuality. So, but I mean, my twin doesn't believe anymore either, and he says he's straight. So I stand and we would be twins would be great, but I don't know. Yeah, he is straight. I hope he doesn't watch this. Yeah, but he doesn't believe anymore either, and there are a bunch of people I grew up with who no longer believe either, and it's not necessarily because they're not straight, although I know at least one of them isn't straight. So.
All right. Then I think, if there are no more questions, then we'll close, I think.
Cool.
So everyone please give a big hand for Max Tang. I just have a couple of quick announcements. Can I just... So, it's an upcoming event. That's our last event of the semester and our next Out Not event. This is featuring people from an organization called Muslimish. It has a chapter here in Boston. It's a group basically that has a dialogue, fosters dialogue between secular Muslims and former Muslims, and a rich understanding about shared secular values and common ground. So that's on Saturday, April 27th. In the afternoon. It's kind of like an extended panel discussion, a sort of mini conference. And we have Sayed and Iman from Boston and Ibrahim, who's coming down for this, coming to Boston for this. And yeah, it's going to be in this room. So that's Saturday, April 27th, 1:30 to 5:30. We also meet most Tuesdays at 5 p.m. in the Student Center. If you go to our website, somit.mit.edu, you can find out more information and see our schedule of events. So yeah, that's just the schedule. And thank you all for coming. Please help yourself to some more food. The roast beef summit is really good. And thank you again, Max.
Thanks for having me.